The forest was silent, except for the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. The late afternoon sun cut narrow beams of gold between the branches, painting the ground in shifting patterns of shadow. Birds that usually filled the woods with cheerful songs were strangely absent. It was too quiet, unnaturally quiet, and in the middle of that unsettling silence stood a young woman, bound tightly to a tree. Her wrists were lashed behind the rough bark, the rope biting into her skin. Strands of her long, dark hair clung to her face, sticky with sweat and streaked with dirt. Her once bright summer dress was torn, the fabric snagged on thorns when the men had dragged her here. She struggled against the ropes, but they were too tight. Every movement only left her wrists more raw and bruised. Her name was Clara Mitchell, and she had never imagined her day would end like this. Just that morning, she had been preparing lunch in her small but cozy kitchen, humming to herself while her husband, Ethan, had been at work in the nearby town. She remembered glancing at the clock, waiting for his call, smiling at the thought of their evening together. They had been married for 3 years, and despite hardships, they were deeply in love. He was her protector, her safe place, her everything. But now, Clara's heart pounded not with love, but with fear. The men who had tied her here were no strangers. They were thugs from the nearby town, men who thrived on intimidation and cruelty. For weeks, they had been harassing the small community at the edge of the forest, demanding money, spreading fear, threatening families. Clara had heard the warnings, but she never thought she would become their target. Until today, it had happened so fast. She had been walking home from the market when a black truck screeched to a stop beside her. Before she could scream, 2 men jumped out, rough hands grabbing her, shoving her inside. They laughed at her struggles, ignored her cries. She tried to fight, but they were stronger. By the time they reached the forest, she was too exhausted to resist. Now she stood tied to the tree, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. "Call your husband," one of the men sneered. He was tall, with a scar down the side of his cheek that made his grin even more sinister. "Let's see how brave he is when he finds you like this." Clara's eyes widened. She realized what they wanted. This wasn't random. They wanted Ethan. Her mind raced. Ethan was not a weak man. He had a history, one she knew about but rarely spoke of. Before settling down with her, Ethan had lived a life he was not proud of. He had been in the military, then involved with dangerous people, fights, and battles that had left scars both on his body and in his heart. He had chosen peace when he chose her. He had walked away from violence. But now, these men were dragging him back into that world. One of them yanked out her phone and forced it into her trembling hands. "Call him," he demanded. "Tell him to come here. Alone." Her fingers shook as she dialed Ethan's number. When his familiar voice answered, tears filled her eyes. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Clara, what's wrong? Why do you sound?" She didn't have time to finish. The thug snatched the phone from her. "Listen, hero," the man growled into the receiver. "We have your wife. She's waiting for you in the woods. Come alone, if you ever want to see her alive again." The line went dead. Clara's heart pounded so loudly she thought it might break her chest. The men laughed, tossing her phone into the dirt. One leaned close, his breath foul against her face. "Your husband better hurry. The longer he takes, the worse it will be for you." She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "Please, Ethan, please come." Miles away, Ethan Mitchell's grip tightened around his phone until his knuckles turned white. The moment he heard Clara's voice trembling with fear, something inside him snapped. The voice of the thug, the threat, it ignited a fire deep within him, a fire he had tried to bury for years. He grabbed his jacket, his keys, and the small locked box he had hidden in the garage. Inside was a piece of his past, a weapon he had sworn never to touch again. But tonight, he had no choice. Tonight, his past was the only thing that could save Clara. As he drove toward the woods, his mind raced with memories of battles fought, enemies defeated, blood spilled. He hated that part of himself, but right now, that was the part Clara needed. When Ethan's truck screeched to a halt at the edge of the forest, he stepped out into the fading sunlight, his eyes scanning the treeline. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with determination. Somewhere in those shadows, his wife was waiting for him. And God help the men who thought they could take her from him. The forest seemed to hold its breath as he entered, each step drawing him closer to Clara, and to the men who had made the mistake of threatening everything he loved. Ethan moved quietly through the forest, every sense alert, every muscle tense. The setting sun bled crimson light through the branches, casting long, eerie shadows. His boots crunched softly over the leaves, his eyes scanning for movement. He could hear faint laughter somewhere ahead, the cruel, careless laughter of men who thought they were in control. He followed the sound until he saw them. Through the trees, in a small clearing, Clara stood tied to a thick oak. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, but her eyes lit with hope when she saw him. The three men surrounding her didn't notice her reaction, they were too busy drinking from a bottle and joking with one another. Ethan's heart ached at the sight of his wife bound and terrified. But his expression hardened into stone. This was not a time for weakness. He stepped into the clearing. The men turned, surprised, but quickly smirked when they saw he was alone. Well, the scar-faced leader sneered, tossing his bottle aside. The husband finally arrives. Tell me, hero, what's your plan? You think you can take all of us? Ethan didn't answer. His eyes locked on Clarice, giving her a silent promise, I'm here. You're safe now. The second thug, a stocky man with a shaved head, laughed. Look at him, doesn't even bring a weapon. Pathetic. But they didn't notice the way Ethan moved, calm, steady, confident. It was the walk of a man who had been here before, who had faced worse odds and survived. Let her go, Ethan said finally, his voice low but powerful. The leader grinned, pulling a knife from his belt and pressing it lightly against Clara's arm. She flinched, but held his gaze, trusting Ethan. Or what? The man taunted. You'll fight us, you'll beg, you'll watch her suffer. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the clearing. Then Ethan's hand slipped behind his jacket, pulling out the pistol he had taken from his old lockbox. The metal glinted in the dying light. The men froze. That's exactly what I'll do, Ethan said coldly. Scarface narrowed his eyes but forced a laugh. You think a gun scares us? You won't shoot, not with your wife so close. You don't know me, Ethan replied, and the look in his eyes made all three men hesitate. Suddenly, the stocky thug lunged forward, swinging a rusted chain. Ethan sidestepped, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted with a force that made bones crack. The thug screamed as the chain fell from his hand. In one fluid motion, Ethan slammed his elbow into the man's jaw, dropping him unconscious to the ground. The second man rushed at him, knife raised. Ethan fired once, clean, precise, sending the blade spinning out of the thug's hand as he cried out in pain, collapsing. Scarface growled, shoving Clara hard against the tree as he pulled her tighter into his grip, pressing the knife against her throat. One more step and she dies. He roared. Clara whimpered, her body trembling, but Ethan didn't falter. His hand was steady, his aim unshaken. You've already lost, Ethan said. Scarface's eyes darted between his fallen men and Ethan's unwavering stare. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. He hadn't expected this. He thought Ethan would be weak, desperate, broken. Instead, he stood like a warrior returned from the shadows. Put her down. Ethan's voice was like steel. Scarface pressed the knife harder against Clara's skin, but before he could act, Clara herself moved. Summoning every ounce of courage, she stomped on his foot, twisting her body just enough to break his grip. It was all the opening Ethan needed. One shot rang through the forest. Scarface stumbled back, the knife slipping from his hand, his body crashing to the dirt. His eyes wide with shock, his last breath rattled out before silence returned. Clara gasped as the ropes fell away. Ethan rushed forward, catching her in his arms. She clung to him, sobbing into his chest. I knew you'd come, she whispered through her tears. I'll always come, Ethan replied, holding her tightly, his voice breaking for the first time. But the moment of relief didn't last. The second thug, the one Ethan had disarmed, groaned and began to stir. Clara gasped, but Ethan calmly turned, pointing his gun once more. The man froze, fear flooding his eyes. Run, Ethan ordered, and never come back. The thug didn't need telling twice. He scrambled to his feet and disappeared into the woods, leaving only silence behind. Clara and Ethan stood in the clearing, the fading light wrapping around them. But something had changed. Ethan had crossed a line tonight. He had touched the darkness he had promised never to return to. Clara could feel it in the way he held her, a tension, a heaviness. Ethan, she whispered, searching his face. Are you okay? He looked at her, his jaw tight, his eyes haunted. I did what I had to do. For you. But this wasn't just about me, was it? She asked softly. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the lifeless body on the ground, the memories of his past flooding back. He realized the men hadn't chosen Clara at random. They had known exactly who he was. This was a message. They weren't here for you, Ethan said finally, his voice low. They were here for me. Clara's breath caught. What do you mean? He tightened his hold on her. It means everything has changed. My past, it's found me again. And now, it's not just my fight anymore. It's ours. The forest was silent once more, but now it felt heavier, darker. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. And as he led Clara out of the woods, his heart swore one thing: no matter what came, he would protect her. Even if it meant becoming the man he had tried so hard to leave behind. Because when her husband arrived, everything changed, not just for the men who tied her, but for their entire future.